Every time we have a natural disaster, or certainly a challenge, as Hurricane Harvey, would certainly be categorized. There's a lot of people that kind of sit back and say, well, why does the chemical industry make such significant investments in a region that is prone to this type of a natural disaster or occurrence? Every one of you are global companies. I mean, you make investments in different regions around the world. You're obviously making significant new investments here, even in spite of the prospects for hurricanes. Why here? And I'd be interested. How do you respond to these critics who are saying, why are you building in what has been historically an area that's prone to hurricanes?
Yeah. Maybe I'll start. First of all, the resource in terms of raw materials is right here along the Texas Gulf Coast. So when you think about cheap natural gas, the abundance of LPGs and so on, the inputs for our product are in close proximity to the Gulf Coast. Then you have a very broad and expansive network of pipelines that connect all these plants together, and it's a platform that frankly is scalable. Lastly, I don't want to say too much to allow my colleagues also an opportunity, but I think the most important reason why beyond those two is a very capable workforce and great relationships with the communities where we operate. Without people, we couldn't make the product. We couldn't do what our companies do today. And as LyondellBasell, we invest with confidence along the Gulf Coast for those reasons.
I would just add that we depend on each other as an industry for supply of raw materials back and forth. So being co-located next to our business partners is important. Logistics is a huge part of why we invest here. So the Port of Houston, the Port of New Orleans are two of the biggest ports in this country. And being able to get product out is important. We've got access to all major transportation lanes to get materials out: rail, barge, intercoastal, deep water marine. That's all very important to us, as well as trucking. So there's an entire community here that needs to grow together, and it makes us low cost. And obviously, we design to be able to stand hurricanes, but you can't design every single aspect of that into the plant.
Jerry, do you want to add it?
I mean, to repeat that, it's the infrastructure, it's the skilled labor here, it's the shipping channels, it's the oil and gas, it's everything that's the baseline to be successful in the chemical industry. I think it's also the culture of safety, the culture of working together and collaborating with the local and officials and the government regulators. It's something very important to us. But so the mindset with being prepared and planning for any type of disaster like this, it's in the mindset and the culture, and something that's we're very proud to be part of.
Ken, did you have?
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is the breadth and depth of engineering talent that exists in this region. Excellent engineering schools, decades of experience in the industry, and so there's a lot of talent in this area.
I don't know if it was Ann on my team or someone on Hector's team that really prepared that video, but I thought it was excellent. Well done. But I didn't see any interviews with any of the CEOs or top management on that. You had the people that are on the ground in the management of it, and obviously did a superb job. But from a top management position, I'd be interested when you have a hurricane like Harvey that's approaching. What is your priorities, and what are the actions that you're taking? And Jerry, we'll start with you.
Okay. Yeah, it's you have many stakeholders as a company. All of us do, and all the stakeholders are very important. But when you have a hurricane that was impacted us like this, our top priority and only priority really is the safety of our personnel, safety of our employees and our neighbors. That's number one. That's paramount. And you really can't run a plant safely, you can't shut down a plant safely, you can't even start up a plant safely without your employees. So that's paramount. We look at that. We assess, when you have a storm like this, we assess our priorities based on the immediate impact of the hurricane. So it starts with our employees, it goes to our neighbors, then extends out to the first responders, then we go to government regulators, Then we think about our customers, and last, and it's important, it's our shareholders. And so when we look at all this, this is really what's important to us. And the thing is, how do you inform all the stakeholders? How do you keep them informed and updated with what's going on? That's something it takes a lot of preparation, and it's the key point of this is really having a very structured system in place. And this all goes into our preparedness of Hurricane Harvey and our efforts, is that we have a good plan, a good process, we have roles and responsibilities. Our communication department, we look at our public information, and we look at our liaison officer. They're the gatekeeper. That person's the gatekeeper to make sure that we have a very clear and consistent message that goes to all of our stakeholders. And of course, in today's world, with social media, it's instantaneous. So we did use social media. That was something that we used that was very successful and very effective, efficient, of communicating to our employees and communicating with all of our external shareholders.
Jim?
Yeah, I would just say that we obviously want our leadership that's on the ground here to manage the situation here, but there's a lot of connection between the corporate management and the leadership on the ground here. So we had daily communications during the hurricane. Actually, we started having daily communications about 5 days before the hurricane hit in Rockport, because we knew it was coming and we knew it was going to be big. Just for record, the previous amount of high rainfall that we'd had in a hurricane was about 35 inches. And we had somewhere in the order, depending on where you were, 50 to 60 inches of rainfall during this hurricane. So it was unprecedented. And we kind of knew that was setting up going into the hurricane so we could get ready for that. And then the other thing is just the impact on operations. For us, this is about a third of our company's output. So it's a significant material event for investors if we lose this capacity for a significant amount of time. And people. First order of business is people, making sure that they're safe, not just safe at work, but what about their homes? Many of them were in places where their homes were going to be impacted, and some of them, their homes were going to be not livable for some amount of time. And we know this through a lot of experience with other events.
Bob, did you want to add?
Yeah, we practice a lot in terms of preparing for these sorts of events as much as one can. This one turned out to be much larger than anything we would have imagined. And I can tell you, for me, first of all, we couldn't travel to the office here in Houston because there was a lot of flooding, and we closed the office. So I actually said, look, I'm going to lead by example. I'm not going to show up at the office even if I can make it, because I don't want people to feel compelled to come in. And as leaders, through all of that practice, the hardest part is to let the process run. And I did. I didn't get involved in the day-to-day decisions. I listened in on every single call. I was most concerned about our people, the communities, and the decisions we were making, but I didn't want to be active on the calls because I wanted to let the process run and let leaders at different levels in the company lead. This is what they prepare for. And so on one hand, you can imagine as a CEO of a company like this, it's difficult to not want to weigh in on every decision, but on the other hand, that's why we have experts. That's why these people know more than we do. They're on the ground, and you have to trust leadership. It's not always the easiest thing to do in a crisis like this, but I think the best, because you got to let the experts lead and do what's right. So, but I can assure you, I was on every single call, listening and pacing, and as I watched the rain come down in my West Houston house, we had almost 50 inches at our home in Houston, so no flooding, thankfully. But I was keenly aware, if I could add, that what I was most impressed by was the human spirit and the amount of dedication and ownership of our people to find a way to get to the facilities to help out when in many, many cases they were personally impacted by the storm. And that sort of sense of wanting to help the company at the same time dealing with their own issues, it's just remarkable. And this is why we continue to invest with confidence here on the Gulf Coast.
Now, Ken, I understand that you were actually kind of the lead in terms of the response on behalf of BASF. And I'd be interested, when you saw the forecast for Hurricane Harvey, how were you prioritizing, your actions and your engagement with your team?
Yeah, so a clarification, I led up the people response, which we led with a small team. And so what we did was we essentially have a very focused program where all of our preparation around preparing for when a storm comes in, it's about environmental health and safety of the sites, taking care of our people, protecting our assets, and then taking care of our customers. So we try and make sure that all of our decision making is related to any preparation is around those items. In regards to, as the storm was approaching, our sites begin their preparations. We have a regular incident command system. We launch the call system. We initiate those processes. And much like Bob mentioned, there's a lot of process and rigor behind that, and it's well practiced after so many years of working in the Gulf. In regards to the people response, what we recognized was that this was particularly this part of Texas. It wasn't so much of a wind event; it was a water event, and the volumes of water and what we were managing, and we could see that it was going to cut across multiple sites, and quite a few of our personnel were going to be impacted personally. And so that's when we pulled a people team together that was working across Texas to leverage assets and resources from elsewhere in the country to essentially help out. So we had, for example, at our Geismar, Louisiana plant, a number of teams of people went out into the Home Depots and the Lowe's of the world, bought up materials and equipment that people knew that they would need because they've had flood events in the past, and crated them up for us so that when we could get the infrastructure running here, we created essentially a storehouse, a warehouse system that allowed our employees to come and pick up all of those crated materials so that they could use them on their homes. So that's a specific example of the infrastructure that we put in place that we were able to get rolling immediately to take care of our people. And we have multiple other examples of things, monies and these types of things that we did to help out our staff. We had over 300 people impacted, having their homes damaged and flooded. So the idea there was if people could not have to worry about, as much of what's going on personally in their lives, they're really able to help focus on those priorities that I mentioned earlier. We wanted to take care of our people, and that gave them an opportunity also for them to focus on what we needed to do in regards to the environmental health, safety, of those other issues that I talked about earlier.
Mm-hmm. Now, Jerry, I know you were featured in one news story I read about Covestro put together kind of a drive-through for providing supplies for your employees. I thought that was kind of an interesting concept.
Yeah, I have to mention our site leads here, Rod Herrick. He's in charge of our Baytown site, and we worked together for quite a few years. And we, when you had this type of hurricane, this impact, and I think we're all together, we have all the processes in place, and we know how to prepare for a hurricane and prepare for a storm, and you follow the protocol. And of course, we were looking for the wind and maybe a storm surge, but the flooding was something that was quite unique and quite different for all of us. Operationally, we're very confident what we're doing, safely operating a plant, shutting a plant down. But the people aspect of this was quite different this time. It wasn't a short-term fix. We had to be in it for the long haul. We had to make sure that we're taking care of our people. And one time, I think all of us, I think that's a culture of industry. When you have a crisis, people come together. That's Americans. We come together and we help each other out. We had a pouring out of help regionally and globally to try to help everyone out. And of course, it's the first one, who gets all the supplies, who gets all the hotel rooms, who gets the mobile trailers and so forth. Well, we went out of our way. My point was to tell our employees and tell the senior management, put yourself in their situation. We might not be living it might not impact us personally. Put yourself in there and tell me what we need to do. These are our people. We can't run a plant without them. We can't safely start up or even shut down a plant without them. And to get them back into work safely is something that we worked on to. But that's, we learned quite a bit. That'll be one of our takeaway learnings from this whole hurricane.
Jim or Bob, did you want to add anything?
I think on preparedness, after an event like this, after every event like this, we go back and we do lessons learned on the event, and it helps us get ready for the next event. So the things that we learned from Katrina and Ike, helped us with this hurricane because they showed us places where the infrastructure was weak and we had to go in and do projects. So we'd done projects for a number of years on infrastructures like pipeline connections, levees, electrical reliability. The thing that was different about Harvey this time was the duration. In most cases, when you prepare for a hurricane, you think the hurricane's going to hit, and within a couple of days, the hurricane's gone and we're into recovery mode and we're starting to get things back in order. You were on the order of 5 to 7 days of event, and then you had another week kind of sorting out what was the damage before you could actually see yourself clear to get into recovery mode. So we tested the limits of everything. We tested the limits of the infrastructure. We tested the limits of our own supplies. So when we lay in supplies, like was said on the video, to be ready for a hurricane: diesel fuel, food to feed the operators that are going to be on hurricane duty, food to feed the contractors that are going to be there helping us out. We tested the limits of all that because we weren't planning for the duration of that to be 2 weeks. We were planning for the duration of that to be more 4 or 5 days. But we got through it, as Jerry said, and you get through it because everybody pulled together.
Yeah, I think, the only thing I would add is building on the food issue. We had that at a couple of our sites where we were at a very critical stage. And actually our Lake Charles site, and the storm was sort of headed that way, and people at Lake Charles were able to gather food and get a truck. And you can imagine trying to get supplies in during the storm when there was flooding. Very difficult. People can't get out of the sites. This is when the community of our company came together, and our Lake Charles site was able to find a way to get food to both our Channelview and the refineries. And Kim Foley, our site manager from Channelview, is here today. We were within hours of running out of food, essentially. Things that we normally would take for granted, or we would say, hey, we're prepared and we've got plenty. But as Jim and others mentioned, the duration of the storm just kept going, and we reached a point where people couldn't get out and things couldn't get in, and the food was running out, sort of. So, we'll learn a lot from this, and we're going to get better. And I think as we think about investment, we'll also think about how do we harden these facilities for future events like this. Yes. We're going to get better.
If you followed some of the media after the event, a lot of focus was on the decision process to shut down. There seems to be somewhat of a lack of understanding of what are the protocols and the procedures that you have in place that really guide the decisions on a shutdown. I'd be interested in, from a management level, how what's your involvement in that, and how are those decisions made? I know a lot of you alluded, you put those in the hands of the site person, yeah. But these are based on plans that are put in place in advance.
Yeah.
And Jerry, maybe you can start off there.
Yeah, it's an important point here that when you make a decision, and you have to make a decision to shut down your whole site, or even to restart your site, it's a great deal of thought goes behind this and forethought. This is something very important to us. Number one priority, and it makes all of our decisions, is about the safety of our employees, period, paramount, and our neighboring communities. That's what drives the decisions we make, and that's behind it. I do hear things, I read things about, you're going to keep the plant running because you're worried about the revenue or the profits or whatever. In our discussions, that will never come up. It never will. And Rod knows that. He's sitting in this room. It's about safety. Safety first, process safety, and making sure that we can maintain a safe operations. We shut down our plant. We shut down our plant after the hurricane hit land. That's what we didn't expect the amount of flooding. We're in pretty good shape. Our assets were in good shape. But we knew it was a safe thing to do, and we did, and we ran through our protocol to safely shut down our site without any incident. Now, when you talk about this hurricane, it's the other impacts, indirect impacts we had on looking at how do you restart a plant up? Because I think everyone knows that you shut down and restart a chemical plant, those are opportunities for, let's say, emissions and releases and so forth, and how do we manage that? Well, when you start up a plant, our protocol is, first of all, we have to make sure that We had the logistics network up and running because that was severely damaged in this hurricane. You saw the rail track pictures and so forth. We shipped most of our material by rail cars. So suppliers were declaring force majeure. We couldn't get supply. So we had to make sure we got back a continuous supply. Our network's operational, our logistics network, but also our employees. You can't do anything without our employees. And like you said, half of our employees were impacted by this storm, and we couldn't get them back into the plant until about 5 days after landfall. But you have to have your employees back on stream with their mind set to focus on the plant, their operation, and the safety factor or the sequential starting up a manufacturing site like this. Rod here, he goes through this, and we don't have 4I, 6I, we have 8I principle before you sign off to start up any unit. So once we came on back, we felt we had everything moving in the right direction, then he would make a decision, and we go and start up sequentially our manufacturing site, which, as some of you know, takes several days to start up. But we will not compromise the safety of our employees or the safety of our neighbors, period. And that's what makes our decision when we shut down and start up.
It's very site specific, and even within the sites, it's very unit specific, and so that empowerment is at that level of the organization for good reason. Seadrift, Texas is near Victoria. That's one of our large sites. That was due north of Rockport, where the hurricane hit. There was never a question about running Seadrift. We knew we were going to try to bring Seadrift down because it was a safe thing to do. And so we did and got it down safely in stable state. But you did have a emergency command center there, and we had one set up in Austin so that we had contact back and forth between the two. In Freeport, it was at the site level, and I would say our challenge with the site team, the thing I always ask on those calls was, to Earl Shipp at the time was, are you sure you want to run through it? And the team made the decision because they knew their plant and they knew what was going on around them. It's complicated because these are large integrated facilities. They're integrated into pipeline systems, in some cases gas pipeline systems, and in some cases, if enough of us shut down on some of those pipeline systems, you shut down the whole gas pipeline system, and then we've got a whole nother level of complexity for startup. So you have to look at a lot of things, not just within your own site, partnerships, who else is going to run on the site. You have to talk to your neighbors. Are they going to run or not? It's a very complicated decision, and that has to be kept, in my way of thinking, it has to be kept locally, and we just got to keep communications with each other. And we had communications with all of our partners who are on the site, too.
Yeah, I think for us, we started down in Corpus, and we shut down a couple days before the storm made landfall. So that was wind we were worried about. And then as the storm traveled north, we were more worried about water. And the response is very different in terms of whether you shut down or don't shut down. Wind is maybe something we're more prepared for. The magnitude of water, we never expected so much water. And just to add to Jim's point, as we move further north into Houston and started to consider what to do at Channelview, LaPorte, Bayport, at our refinery in Pasadena, there's so much interconnectivity between all the sites, whether it's supply of nitrogen, supply of ethylene. Yeah. Can we get crude oil to the refinery? Can we get people in and out? So, there's a lot of interdependency, and there's a lot of conversations going on between companies, between sites, and I think this is when sort of the chemical industry comes together as one to make good decisions. And I can only emphasize, just like my colleagues here, that it's not always obvious that shutting down is the safest thing to do. Because you think about airplanes, the greatest risk is takeoff and landing. Same thing with petrochemical sites or refineries. The greatest risk is when you're shutting down and starting up. And so, our preference is if we can do it safely, we want to run through it, not for the revenue or the profit or even, frankly, to satisfy customers. It's more about what's the safest for our people and the communities. And sometimes running through it is better. And again, there's judgment in that. And as we thought about Channelview, for example, whether we'd continue to run both our crackers there, and can we, ultimately, I asked a few questions offline, but I left it for the experts to decide because there's a lot of considerations and a lot of things to weigh in the equation before you decide to go or don't go. And finally, I'd only say that as this is all about judgment and using good judgment, you can't second guess yourself afterwards. I think you make the decision you make and you do it as safely as possible.
Yep.
And you move on, and then post-mortem you learn from it and you think through the next time this happens, what could I do better?
With Hurricane Harvey being more of a rain event, but we've had past hurricanes that were more of a wind event. Is it becoming clear in terms of what are some of the really priority infrastructure investments that we need to be looking at in this region that could mitigate some of the adverse impacts we saw with Hurricane Harvey? And I don't know who would like to start.
I can start if you wish. So I've had a lot of conversations with Bob Harvey at the Greater Houston Partnership, with Mayor Turner, with Judge Emmett. I think this coastal spine project is going to be important. Hardening the ship channel. Yep. The ship channel, probably needs to be dredged. There's a lot of activity around the ship channel that's going to be required if we're going to weather something like this again. Rail infrastructure needs to be bolstered further. So I think those are some examples of things that need to be done. We have a great platform here on the Gulf Coast, but it's one that in parts of the platform is reaching capacity or is aging, and it needs to be rejuvenated so that we can have a vibrant industry for another 100 years.
Some of the original investments here go back as much as 70+ years. And we went through a decade or more of really not much investment in the U.S. Gulf Coast, and now we've got another wave of investment coming at us. So as Bob said, there is definite need for some infrastructure investment, and I think we're in the same spot that the United States is in right now, looking at what do we do to reinvest in our infrastructure for the future. It'll be important not just for the existing assets that are here, but for that next wave of growth, because as Cal mentioned, there are about $130 to $180 billion worth of investments, depending on whose numbers you listen to. I'd say about half of that has been committed or completed, and the other half hasn't been done yet. And so that infrastructure is important to help support that other half of those investments that are still yet to come.
Well, maybe we can round this up with just a final kind of question. Is maybe it'd be kind of a two-part. One is I think there's a lot of questions in whether or not a significant event such as Hurricane Harvey is that do you think going to have any impact on future investment decisions in manufacturing in this region, or is it going to influence how you might allocate some of those? And so why don't we just give you all an opportunity to kind of close out with that.
All right, well, maybe I'll start then. For us, I don't think it changes our view on investment on the Gulf Coast. I think it does identify some things we need to do better. But in the end, if you think about the platform that we have here on the Gulf Coast, the pipeline network, the proximity to the resource which we're trying to harvest and bring to market, there's no better place to invest than the Gulf Coast. But we have to be aware that there are bottlenecks that are presenting themselves which need to be alleviated through investment. But for us at LyondellBasell, we're not, our investment approach has not been altered as a result of these weather events. And frankly, we'll harden the existing assets to be able to withstand these sorts of storms in the future.
Yeah, I think our view is the Gulf Coast is the chemical industry here, so I don't think that changes our view. It might change what we decide, how we decide to build the site based on what we've learned. So the way we design the infrastructure, the way we design transportation, the logistics, some of the other things might be different as we move forward, take those lessons learned into the next design. But I don't think it'll change the economics and the access to the export markets from building in the Gulf Coast.
Yeah, this is our chemical. This region is our chemical industry. It's everything we need to be successful is in this region. Yes, we need to improve on infrastructure. There's no doubt. We've heard that, and we must focus on that area. I think what about this industry, and we'll continue to invest in this region, is because of the people in this room and because of the regulators understand the industry, understand our business. We feel that there's something that's important about the culture, safety, and what we need to do for the region. And the collaboration between our companies and the regulators and the first responders, it's by far best in the world. And if you are in our industry and you want to be successful, that's what we must have. We must be able at the table, sit and talk about the issues and continuous learning and improving our industry. So that's what I see as the big advantage for this. Everything you need to be successful in our industry is here in the Houston surrounding area. So just for me, from everybody else, thank you so much for your support.
BASF sees great value in this region, and we're going to continue to invest in this area. So these storms, it's yes, it happened. We're learning from it. We're getting stronger. We're going to continue to invest in this region, and our emergency response plans and the infrastructure, like we talked about earlier, we just need to keep going. So we're here to stay. We're going to keep investing.
Well, thank you.